Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal, Bigfoot. We've got 2 new Dogman stories in this show, both sent in by you viewers. One is from Texas, the other is from out in Montana, and both are alleged to be true, at least according to the person submitting the emails. But none of this would have been possible without the kind contribution of today's executive producer, Bash Johnson. There is a Johnson by the name of Bash who, just in case of market crash, established a very super secret stash, which included a lot of cash. Thanks for sending some cash from your stash to us, Bash. We'll use it to buy some hash and throw a breakfast bash with corned beef hash. Oh my god, I can't stop rhyming. Oh wait, I just did. I'm joking around a bit here out of nervousness mainly. This first story kinda freaks me out a bit. The Dogman in it seems to do things just to menace the humans in the story. More than just a big predator, he seems almost like something from a nightmare. I guess that's why I'm particularly frightened by this story from Texas that we're calling the Galveston Growler. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I don't know if you know it, but they have Dogman way down in Texas too. I don't live there anymore, but I was raised on Galveston Island, and when I was a young teenager, I saw one of them with my own eyes. It scared the daylights out of me, and that was the only time I ever saw my daddy cry. Now, for those of you who may not be from the area, Galveston is an island. The main city is up north and is your fairly typical grid layout small city. They've got amusement parks, state parks. It's a nice place in general. There's a trailer area down south, and in the middle of the island is a neighborhood that's actually called Galveston Island. That's where my family was living when this story happened way back almost 40 years ago now, or at least 35, or maybe it was 50. I'm not that good with math, and I get way worse as I get older. So let's just say this happened in the 20th century and leave it at that. This part of the island in the middle is a lot more rural than most of the rest of it. When roads are paved here, they're one-lane blacktop laid on top of the dirt with grass on either side. This area incorporates the island's bayous and coves and all sorts of wetlands, but there are homes scattered throughout in there, and that's where we were. One of my chores was to take out the garbage and put it in the cans over by the shed. It was not my favorite chore, because I would have to walk outside alone in the pitch darkness. There was an outside light on the house, but it was not bright, and there was no electricity at all over by the shed. We had these big garbage bins that were somewhat newfangled for that time. They had clamps on top to prevent wild animals from getting inside them. That, in and of itself, scared me. If my parents felt so certain that bears and other dangerous wildlife could get into their garbage, then they must have believed those animals were in fact out there in the night. The same night where they sent their only son out unarmed and without even a flashlight. I talked to them once about it, but I got called a whiner, so I never spoke to them about it again. Anyway, like I said, nothing ever happened to me while I was taking out the garbage. Until this one night when, as I approached the shed, I could swear I heard something growling. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing. I took another couple of steps and the growling returned. When I stopped, it stopped. When I walked, it returned. I looked down at the garbage bags I was carrying and at myself. Was it something I was doing or carrying that was making that growling noise? I wiggled the bags. I wiggled myself, dancing but remaining in my spot. There was nothing that sounded like growling. Deciding to experiment, I carefully and as quietly as I could took one tentative step forward. The growling returned, far more intense than before. I turned and lumbered back to the house with the garbage bags in my hands, my heart beating so hard that it felt like I had someone kicking a bass drum in my chest. I ran into the house shouting for my father. I found both my parents in the living room watching TV. I told them there was a growling coming from the shed. My father, not taking his eyes off the television screen, asked, "So?" That wasn't the response I'd been expecting. "Dad," I whined, "remember you told me that if I heard a growling I should come straight back home and tell you?" "Well, son," he began wearily, "I told you that when you were 5 years old. Are you going to still come running to me for the rest of your life? Sooner or later, you'll be running to the graveyard to see me, you know." My mother actually defended me that time, or maybe she just wanted to disagree with Dad, I don't know, but she said he shouldn't send a boy out to do a man's work. There might be a mother bear hiding in our shed with her pups. He could be sending his only son to his death just because he was too lazy to go throw out the garbage for himself. Dad sat there watching the TV and asked again, "So?" Mom kept on going, and sooner or later Dad figured out it would be less annoying to just go throw the garbage out than have to listen to any more lecturing. He grabbed his defense, loaded it with ammo, then opened the back door of the house. I looked at him, wondering why he was just standing there. It turned out he wanted me to lead him to the spot. He didn't even know where we threw out the garbage. That made me laugh. I grabbed one of the garbage bags, leaving the other for him, and started walking toward the shed in the dark. As we started approaching, I could hear the growling, and I stopped. My dad just kept going. I asked him, "Didn't you hear the growling?" He was like, "Hear the what? Speak up, son. You sound like a timid little kitty cat. That's your mother's fault you ended up like that. Why, if it was up to me." And while he was going on and on, lecturing and insulting me, walking directly toward the growling that he was talking too loud to hear, I just stood there, amazed at the man's absolute certainty that he couldn't possibly be in danger because it was only me and my mom who felt that he was. I realized how little he thought of anything I said, and so I stopped warning him that he was walking into danger. I just dropped the garbage bag where I stood, and I watched. Well, I will tell you this. There was no mother bear and cubs in our shed. Heck, there wasn't anything in the shed at all as far as I could tell. No, the source of that growling was coming from the other side of the shed, the side we couldn't see. And that source of said growling stood up when my dad got too close. And when he did, his dog-like head peered over the roof of the shed at my dad. I mean, it looked down to see my dad, who was 6'3". There was somehow a dog that stood taller than our shed, and it was growling at us, looking directly at my dad with these weirdly glowing eyes. I tell you, it did not look like any natural kind of animal when it loomed at us over that shed. Maybe it was the eye shine, but something about the beast struck me as supernatural or paranormal. I don't like to use words like that, but I'm not sure how else to put it. At the time, I thought I was going to see a bear, and instead, I saw this thing that I interpreted as a werewolf. I don't remember if I knew what a Dogman was at that time, so possibly I thought it was a werewolf, because what other options did I have? But I also, in my gut, felt that it was something magical or evil. I know that's not a rational statement, and I know I'm not backing that idea up with any proof other than it had eye shine and the whole scene felt weird. I know that lots of animals have eye shine, and I also know that any number of things can create a spooky mood, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're experiencing something that science can't explain. My father, upon looking up to see a big old dog head looking back down at him, dropped his garbage bag and his defense and ran back to the house weeping like a little girl whose mommy left her at kindergarten for the first time ever. I followed him back to the house, walking backward and eyeing the large dog's head the entire time. I made certain not to look it in the eye, but I watched to see that it was only watching me and not following. Now, just before I bolted into the house, I saw the creature come out around the shed and begin walking toward me. I should be clear that the entire time that the situation had been happening, I had only seen the head, and I was imagining the rest of the creature. I thought that we had a huge wolf-dog hybrid that stood maybe 7 or 8 feet tall at the shoulder, the largest dog or canine in history. But I never imagined that it was bipedal. That concept had just never entered my mind, so when the immense dog thing began walking around the shed and toward me, you can imagine my shock to discover that the animal was, well, actually far smaller than I had interpreted it, and was not standing on 4 legs at all. Instead, what lurched around that shed was something far more like a Sasquatch, but one with a canine head on it. So it was a werewolf in my mind, as I had said before. When I got inside, my father was on his knees, hugging my mother and weeping about how scared he was. My mother was rolling her eyes and humoring him, pretending that she was concerned. When she saw me, she asked me where my father's defense was. I told her where he left it, and she rolled her eyes again. "I'll go out and get it after sunup in the morning," she told me, and then she told me to lock the house up good and go to bed. I felt bad for her. She was going to have to console my big scaredy cat of a father. That was the first time I had ever seen him cry, but it wouldn't be the last. That Dogman killed my father's nerve. He was never the same man ever again. He would still talk a big game, but that was the first time I noticed that he never backed it up. It was the same with horror movies. He would cry during those, too. I don't know how he could have made it through life without my mom to be brave for him. So, I want to say that I know I sounded crazy when I was going on about how the animals seemed paranormal or supernatural. I was just being honest. That was how I felt about it as a kid. But either a giant dog or an upright walking canine can scare the poo out of you, and it's only natural to think that it's unnatural. I mean, that thing was scarier than any bear I've ever run across. So, let's assume it was a real living creature. Where could it have come from? If it's real, it must be rare, since I've never even heard of anyone around here seeing one of those things that we saw. Maybe it doesn't normally come over to that part of the island. Maybe it was just a random once-in-a-lifetime thing. If that were the case, he would still need some kind of habitat not too far away. In fact, there is a possible candidate for such a habitat nearby. The Brazonia National Wildlife Refuge is just across the water from Galveston Island and down a ways to the southwest. And the bayous and wetlands just outside of our part of town must have seemed a bit like home to the creature. Anyway, that's kind of what I think about the possibility of this being an actual real species. It might be hiding out over there. But if you ask me, anything that big and bipedal that has remained undiscovered this long is more likely from some other kind of reality, time, or dimension. As wacky as that may make me sound, I still think it's the best explanation for the Galveston Growler, the Hungry Horse Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, when I was younger, about 1,000,000 years ago, I used to date a girl that lived in a place called Hungry Horse, Montana. And one night, after walking her home, I swear to you that I saw a dog-headed monster coming out of the woods along South Fork Drive. This was many, many years ago, and I'm not 100% certain that I even remember correctly who was there, but I remember a bunch of us all going out to have a good time, using my old friend Bob's van to go bar hopping, basically. The evening was drawing to a close for most of us, and the gang drove my girlfriend toward Hungry Horse where she lived. When we were nearly at her house, everyone spotted some restaurant open on Highway 2E that they all wanted to go to. My girlfriend and I told them to go ahead and eat there, because then she and I could have a little time for ourselves, for a romantic walk home. We always went everywhere with our group of friends, and we rarely had time to do boyfriend-girlfriend type of private stuff. I mean, that might have been the only time I ever got to hold hands with her and walk her home, since we lived in towns that were miles apart. So, as enjoyable as that little stroll was, it was also uninterrupted by any cryptids, so I doubt you want to hear about any of that. I was walking on air after delivering her to her parents. I went back the same way I had come, intending to rejoin my friends, get something to eat, then get driven home so I could crash. The trees didn't look as romantic on the way back as they had on the way there, though. Something felt off, but I tried to ignore it and tell myself it was nothing. I picked up my pace, both because I was getting hungrier and because I was getting increasingly creeped out for no logical reason that I could think of. And then I heard the howling. It stopped me in my tracks. It sounded so close, and yet I couldn't see the source of it around me. I knew it wasn't one of the neighbor dogs for two reasons. First, it came from my left, past the trees at the edge of town. And second, the howl was soon joined by a few others that were from the neighbor dogs to my right. No, there was some kind of wild canine out there in those woods on my left, and it was pretty close by. I got so scared by this that I momentarily thought about going back to my girlfriend's house and asking her parents for a lift to the restaurant, but it was only 2 or 3 blocks away. I decided I'd rather die than have that girl see me as weak or cowardly, and when the second howl came, much louder and far closer, I knew I might have to literally do that. I took off running, getting exhausted almost immediately, then soon slowed to a jog which I hoped I could maintain. I also hoped that none of the neighbors would see me running down the street, as they might take me for some kind of crook. This entire situation was very embarrassing, and my face was burning as I ran. I remember staring forward at the main road as though it were the promised land of eternal salvation or something. If I could make it that far, I thought, I'd be out in the light. Then whatever was pacing me in the trees, making those howling noises, would probably leave me alone. I remember thinking about it and not being certain that it wouldn't chase me right across the highway, but I really hoped it was something that would have preferred to remain in the woods and avoid traffic and streetlights. I crossed the street to my right, even though I needed to eventually turn left. I just wanted to put more space between myself and those creepy-looking, howling woods. Nobody was out, and half the houses had their lights out. At this point, I stopped worrying about being embarrassed, and I actually was hoping that people would walk or drive by so that I wouldn't be so alone in this situation. It seemed, though, that the neighborhood had already turned in for the night. I looked for better lit areas to walk in, but they were all out on the highway, not back here in the sleeping town next to the dark woods. I was not used to jogging, especially not in dress shoes, and my feet began to ache as much as my lungs gasped for air. I had to stop and lean against a phone pole to catch my breath, giving my feet a break. I was really tired, and I wished I could go to sleep at the same time that I was panicking. I just wished I could be in a safe place, sleeping somewhere. I had a feeling that I was in the worst danger I'd ever been in, and I was overwhelmed with the unreasonable desire to be somewhere else, dreaming about this, instead of experiencing it directly. That was the kind of thought I was thinking, like this is a nightmare. And nightmares only happen when you're asleep in bed. When that thing came walking out of that tree line like he was animated by Ray Harryhausen. He reminded me of a sort of hairy, dog-headed version of the creature from 20 million miles to Earth. Just imagine that instead of that reptilian head, it had a dog head. Then imagine fur over that scaly body. And basically that's what I was looking at. For those of you who aren't sci-fi monster fans, I'll just try to remember as much as I can about what the animal or man thing looked like. It was tall, over 6 feet, maybe even 7. It was either an extremely tall man in a fur version of a ghillie suit, or it was an unclothed animal which walked on its hind legs. The legs looked like 20 million miles to Earth. They bent backward like animal legs. Basically, make that snout a little longer and cover the movie monster with fur, shorten its tail a little bit maybe, and you're kind of looking at what I saw. It looked at me, and I averted my eyes in fear. It took a step or two toward me on its hind legs, just like the monster in the movie, and I took off. Actually, I think I shrieked first and then took off, racing as fast as I could that final block and a half to Highway 2E, lit up bright, like heaven being viewed from purgatory. I looked over my shoulder one time, and I saw the Dogman curiously watching me run, while walking slowly in my direction. I turned and ran even faster, taxing my lungs and body for all they had in them. I never felt so frightened before, and I'm sure the adrenaline from that helped me keep going. I looked over my shoulder a second time, wanting to see how much ground I had gained on the thing. This time, I saw him, but he was down on all fours, and he was moving toward me significantly more quickly than before. I hadn't gained any ground at all. In fact, he might have been catching up. I wanted to scream, but there was neither enough energy in my body or breath in my lungs to accomplish it. Maybe that gave me another adrenaline boost because all I know is I made it to Highway 2E, then I ran straight out into traffic. I didn't think the werewolf would follow me out onto the brightly lit highway, but I wanted to get to the other side immediately, not taking any chances. If I was going to get caught by the thing, I was going to make him survive crossing a highway first, and I was going to make him try to do it in front of a bunch of potential eyewitnesses. Cars swerved and beeped, and I dodged them as though I had any idea what the heck I was doing, miraculously making it to the other side, where I collapsed near the entrance of a parking lot or something, and I gasped for air. It was like my lungs were too small to catch up. I couldn't breathe fast enough or deep enough, and I nearly passed out. I tried to look back to where the Dogman would have been coming from, but my eyes were bleary, and they were darkening around the edges as I desperately worked to get some oxygen back to my brain. All I could make out were lights, some stationary, some moving. There were figures and silhouettes. I didn't know if they were people or the Dogman. It didn't matter at the time, since I hadn't recovered enough strength yet to stand, let alone run anymore. I made it back to rejoin my friends, and I survived all this time just so I could tell this story to you, so I have to assume that the Dogman took one look at Highway 2E and went back to the world he was master of. I don't blame him. That's what I would have done too. By the time I made it to the restaurant, my friends wanted to leave. I was ravenously hungry though, so I ordered a burger which they made me take with me to eat in the car. It made me think about that Dogman's motivation. He must have been a lot hungrier than I was for him to consider coming out in the human world to find some prey. Him chasing me was the scariest thing that ever happened to me, but I bet he was just as scared of starving when he chased me that night. I was thinking how evil he was, but there I was chewing on cow meat no better than the monster would have been doing if he caught me. This is all presuming that the creature was a real flesh and blood animal. and not some hallucination coming out of some vortex, if you believe in that sort of thing. Hungry Horse, Montana is surrounded by woods, and I think that my body certainly felt that it was being chased by a real animal on that night. But since I got away, I suppose I'm fortunate enough that I will probably never get to find out what the true nature was of the Hungry Horse Dogman. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
Come back for more scary stories.